Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Happy New Year, folks. And I'm spending it in a way that I'm really going to enjoy. We got the captain coming back on the show today, Captain John Cox, talking about that tragedy in Japan. And, got some bad news. We got some good news. And we also will talk a little bit about nuts on planes. And I'm not talking about the peanut allergies, folks. I'm talking about the crazy people that we see in the news on planes. And there's some surprising, at least it was to me, statistical information that we're going to get to. But let's go ahead and bring the Capitan's LiveLine graphic up on screen and do our introduction for him. With over 14,000 flying hours and 10,000 hours in command of jet airliners, Captain John Cox is a veteran in major airline, corporate, and general aviation. He has also been an instructor, check pilot, and test pilot. While being actively involved in global air safety, he's been a pioneer in introducing his company, Safety Management Systems, to the aviation, gas, and electric utilities and media industries since the 1990s. Captain Cox is a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society and a member of their Flight Operations Group, a liveryman. And we'll ask him what that is sometime, maybe not today, but a liveryman in the Honorable Company of Air Pilots, a certified registered safety professional, and a member of the International Society of Air Safety Investigators. This guy is expert. John was honored with the FAA's prestigious Master Pilot Award. He's been the aviation analyst for NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and the Weather Channel for the past 15 years, appearing in the news media worldwide to discuss aviation safety. He was also a regular contributor to the show Air Disasters. I watch those things all the time. And he wrote the column Ask the Captain for USA Today's website until 2022. So that's the introduction, folks. That's the LiveLine graphic there. For the promotion. And there's the LiveLine graphic. Okay, so let me click a button here. Take that off the screen. Click another button here, folks. This is the miracle of modern technology. He should come in here. There he is. Hi, Captain.
Good morning, George.
This information is going to become better known here as we go along. It already has somewhat with this tragedy in Japan. Now, I've got this article from USA Today about how the fiery plane crash at Japan's Haneda Airport unfolded. Graphics detail the collision. But I've got some graphics, but you may have some newer information even than this, which was from yesterday.
The latest information I read this morning, and it further describes where the Japanese Coast Guard airplane was on the taxiway and where that they taxied out onto the runway that the JAL A350 was cleared to land on. So it was just shortly after the A350 touched down that they struck the Japanese Coast Guard Dash 8, crushing it. And that's what the fireball you see in the videos is.
Yeah, and I've actually got a phone video of that. And I know a lot of people may have seen this, but if you haven't, here it is real quick. Yeah, it's amazing. It's also extremely tragic when you consider the lives that are being lost while we're looking at this. It's kind of a good news, bad news thing. It's horrific on its face, but it is kind of miraculous that more people didn't perish or weren't severely. And there's that killer, that toxic smoke. My God, and there's the entire skin airframe of the jetliner on fire, this Coast Guard plane. Let me put that away. And like I say, I know people have seen this. But let me bring,
a couple of things to note in that video. You see the airplane, the JAL A350, it touches down and it rolls for a very short period of time, and then there's a massive explosion. And that explosion, which you see behind the airplane, that's the de Havilland Dash 8 exploding, and the jet fuel after the airplane's been struck. And that's why it's such a large fireball right there. But it also punctured the wing fuel tanks of the A350, and that's what you see creating the fire as it goes along the runway. The impact caused the nose gear to fold up. There's a lot of damage at the front of the A350. So it went down on its nose, and that created the friction that ignited that jet fuel as it slid along. The evacuation of the 379 occupants it showed that the airplane was well designed. The exits were very well designed. The crew did a magnificent job. Great training, great execution, but of equal importance is the passengers in the airplane. They didn't try to get their belongings. They listened to what the flight attendants said. They went to the exits that the flight attendants said were available. Only 3 of the 8 were available, and yet they got everybody out in 2 minutes. So when you say it's good design, it's good training, and it's excellent execution, and 379 passengers and crew of the A350 got out. Tragically, there was not much the people in the Dash 8 could have done. They had no idea the airplane was coming, and it hit with such force. It is similar to an accident in Los Angeles in February of '91, where a U.S. Air 737 struck a SkyWest Metroliner, killing everybody in the Metroliner. So the 2 accidents have that in common. But this shows that the design certification for evacuations is good. This shows why people should listen to the safety briefings, and it shows, most importantly, if you're told to evacuate the airplane, don't try to get things out of the overhead. Get out of the airplane, get away from it.
Yeah, and I've got some information on that also. I mean, nobody had a stopwatch on that, but these people had no time to spare, and you won't if something like this happens. If this fire breaks out, because of the toxic smoke, if nothing else, you got to get out of there. And whatever is in that overhead bin is not worth your life. I wanted to bring this up on screen to have you talk about this because I'd prepared this, and people that are watching in video can see it. This is a schematic of the airport here and where the area of collision occurred. And is this in line with what you were describing earlier? Is this about what happened? Yeah.
This is the airplane touched down just before the arrowhead on the lower right hand side, and it touched down and was rolling on the runway. The nose had come down, and then at this taxiway, which is where the Dash 8 taxied onto the runway, and that's when they struck the Dash 8.
Yeah, and we're looking at this. One thing that kind of surprised me, and again, I'm not expert like this, and the captain is, but the runway designations are alphabetical. I thought they were like numerical. Or yeah,
they are. They're both. This runway is designated as runway 34 right. Locally, it's known as runway Charlie, and I've heard it both ways, and the investigators will find out which designation that the air traffic controllers used when they cleared the JAL to land. Now, one thing is, this is a very busy airport, and those JAL pilots have flown in and out of it countless times. If there's a local designation, they're going to be familiar with it. This is a home airport for JAL.
I wondered when I heard how busy it was. Now, is this an airport that you flew into? Have you flown into this airport?
I have flown into this airport as a passenger, but not as a pilot.
Oh, okay. I wondered if they were using alphabetical designations because of language. Would a language barrier be an issue for this airport?
I don't think so, because this is a Japanese home airport. So the instructions are in English, but the designation, I think that it is unlikely that this crew had a language issue, because everybody involved is Japanese. Everybody involved has flown in and out of here before.
I got to ask a question now for my executive producer. I have an executive producer on this show, folks. It's my wife. And we both follow the news, and we're fans of the shows, and we watch the captain on TV. And she's always asked me, why do they use these right and left numerical designations? Why do you have a 34 right and a 34 left when you could have any number assigned to a runway, any letter assigned to a runway, to avoid even the remote possibility of confusion as to who's going which direction on which runway?
The runway designations are because of the magnetic heading of the runway. So runway 34 is approximately 340 degrees magnetic. So that tells you that if you're flying a 340-degree heading and you see a runway in front of you, that's runway 34. So the left and right gives you, if there are parallels, and in some cases there are even triples, where there'll be a left, center, and right. And this is very common, and very, very, very common. I mean, in the U.S., New York, Kennedy, Miami, Orlando, Atlanta, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, they all have parallel runways. So hearing a designation of left or right, or for that matter, center, is very common. And what you do as a pilot is, if you hear the clearance, you're cleared to land runway 34 right, is you'll say, okay, whatever the call sign is, cleared to land 34, and I would always pause right. And it was to tell the controller that I understood that we were to land on the right parallel. And it works very well. We've had very little problem with this. San Francisco's had a very occasional problem with it, but it's rare because it is so commonly used.
Now, for viewers of the show, I always say, if you make a comment in the text your comments in here, I'll put those comments up on screen so people can see them. If you ask a question, I'll read this back for the captain. Question from Sharif. He says, question for the captain, when questions are permitted. They're always permitted. Was the accident upon landing bound to happen, considering there was a similar close call with an Air Canada flight attempting to land at night and almost landed on multiple aircrafts before completing a go-around? Should more be considered at airports for nighttime landings? Air Canada was, however, landing on a taxiway in this case, an error.
The Air Canada flight was landing in San Francisco, and runway 28 left was closed. Consequently, they were cleared to land on 28 right. When they saw the lights, this was about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, their body clock time. So it's what they call a circadian low, which means you're fatigued. The fatigue level is higher in those time frames. But they lined up on a taxiway. What's important is that other pilots saw and made the comment, hey, he's lined up on a taxiway. And a couple of them made the comment, and then the tower local controller said, Air Canada, go around. And that's what averted that. So there are several layers of redundancy in here that in the event that a pilot does line up on the wrong runway, will catch it. The same thing is true on the ground. They have ground radar that tracks the airplanes on the ground. So if you line up on the wrong runway, you have instrumentation in the flight deck that shows your alignment with the runway. And that was something that you check every time, and you utilize that instrument landing system no matter what the weather is. And that shows your alignment both laterally and vertically with the proper runway.
I'm going to take a spin through the rest of these articles here. 5 of the 6 crew members on the Coast Guard plane died, as I mentioned. All 379 passengers and crew aboard the JAL flight evacuated to safety. 14 passengers on the jet had minor injuries, and the Coast Guard pilot was severely injured. I don't know how severe his injuries were. I heard he was on the radio afterwards and made a call out or something like that, Captain.
I understand that they have been able to talk to him, and it was in this morning's briefing. So I don't know. I don't think we yet know how badly injured he was and what he was able to do after the collision.
Okay, so that's from USA Today. Now, this is from Sky News. Official confirms what happened during the collision. The incident happened, as we know. This is laying the groundwork for this, according to the head of the Transport Ministry Civil Aviation Bureau. Is that a Japanese bureau? What is that?
Yeah, that's Japanese bureau.
Okay. A miracle evacuation, as the captain mentioned. The passenger plane was engulfed in flames. We saw the video, but all 379 passengers, they were evacuated. 5 dead. The captain did survive in the Coast Guard plane. Now, Here's the possible causes, and I've got these bulleted, this list, Captain. Before we start here, this is not an act of God. This is not an unavoidable incident. Something is amiss here. Somebody or something screwed up. Agreed?
Well, I think it's a little bit early to know. If there was ambiguity in the clearance and what the pilots understood and what the controllers said, how is that resolved? What could the JAL pilots see? If they saw that there was an airplane on the runway, obviously they're going to go around. But it's called conspicuity. It's how you recognize and how clearly you can see things. So what is the conspicuity of the Dash 8? All of those questions need to be answered before we start looking at probable cause.
All right, now the plane that was the Coast Guard plane. That's a Bombardier. Is that how you pronounce that? Okay,
Bombardier, yeah.
And I mean, you know, every plane since the Wright brothers. Describe these two airplanes because this may be a factor in this.
The Bombardier Dash 8 is a twin-engine turboprop. Been around for a long time. Very, very successful, safe airplane. Built in Canada, and it's considered a workhorse of the turboprops. So the JAL A350 is one of the newest airplanes. This airplane was a couple of years old. It's one of the long-range airplanes that is built in France, and it's considered one of the most modern airliners out there. So there is a size difference, but the Bombardier airplane, it's used in every major airport pretty much in the world. So it's frequent that you see these Dash 8 airplanes flying around.
You know, this list includes the small size of the Bombardier. The interior lights of the Bombardier can be masked by its wings, which sit atop the fuselage. Yeah.
I'm not sure who wrote this as a pilot. So the size of the airplane, I would not consider that to be a possible cause. The interior lights, usually they're off. You can't see them anyway, much less you're above it and the crown of the airplane, the top of the fuselage, is obscuring them. So interior lights, that makes me question whoever wrote this. The Bombardier transponder was reportedly an older model. We don't know what that means or not. If there is ground radar known as ASD, they could track the airplane with older model transponders. And there's a communications. Was it a failure? Was it a miscommunication? So I think that bullet point is premature. And then mistaking identifying signs on the runway. Okay, I think that's premature. We don't know what the Dash 8 crew believed their clearance was. We don't know where they thought they were on the airport. So I think that the probable causes to go this far on the second or third day after this, I think it's totally premature.
Just thinking, and you've landed a lot of jetliners. The pilot of the Bombardier, whether or not he was supposed to be out there, that's something that they'll be looking at. But once he's there ain't much he can do. The plane that's coming in, when you're landing, you're looking at a lot of things. But are you ever look down the runway to see what's on the runway that far down where that guy was at?
Sure, absolutely.
Do you?
Every time you want to check and make sure that the runway's clear. The thing at night is that what lights are on the Bombardier Dash 8 that are visible from the A350. And that's one of the things that they're going to look at. If you look as an example of the 1991 Los Angeles accident, one of the things we did, and I worked that accident, was we had a helicopter fly the approach that the 737 flew with a Metroliner physically on the runway. And the design of the Metroliner was such that the anti-collision light, the red blinking light on the top and bottom of the airplane, was not visible. nor were the strobes and the landing lights were questioned if they were even on. So, and I flew this approach several times. You could not see that airplane on the runway, even that we knew it was there and we were straining to see it. The white navigation light was directly over the center line, and it looked like a runway light, a runway centerline light. So they're going to look to see how much the JAL crew could have seen. Unquestionably, if they knew or believed there was an airplane there, they would not have landed on that runway. So if they looked and couldn't see it, was that because the strobe lights, the blinking white lights on the Dash 8, did they have those strobe lights, and were they illuminated? All of these questions have to be answered. And so that's why I say it's for someone to list out a list of probable causes right now. It's way premature.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a visual on this. So this is a small plane. It's in the dark. It may not have had interior lights, but there should have been flashing strobe lights or takeoff lights or something on that plane, correct?
Normally, when I taxied airplanes out onto the runway, I turn the landing lights on. And at least that illuminates the area in front of you, and they're pretty bright, even from behind. And one of the things that did was I wanted to make the airplane more visible. With strobe lights, a lot of strobe lights will only work in the air. So even though you may turn them on, they don't physically start flashing until the airplane is airborne. So those are the kinds of questions. What lighting was available on the de Havilland, on the Dash 8, and that goes back to the conspicuity question. What could the JAL pilots see?
Yeah, okay, great. Here comes a comment in here from the great Suzanne Murphy. Now, she's the admin of Truth Bomb Activist. She spends a lot of time talking about politics and that type of thing, but for her business life, she also flies around the country, around the world a lot, Captain. And I get that. That's kind of the way that I was. I mean, I had a suitcase and have airplane will travel back in the day. And yeah, there were some incidents that I had a plane that had to make an emergency landing after takeoff because there was smoke in the cabin. I think it turned out to be antifreeze. A really hard landing one time made everybody on the plane scream. As an example, if you fly long enough, you're going to see some strange things. And that's why I cover it on the show. And it brings me back to the question that we started off with, or the statement about safety. Now, you've mentioned that you're oftentimes more at risk driving to the airport than you are flying. But what about the situation now with these? I don't know if they're understaffed or not, but these airports that are so busy, that are so heavily trafficked on the ground. Is that, and you're a safety guy, is there more danger of that now than ever on the ground?
We're clearly understaffed with air traffic controllers, and we can lay the blame at the FAA for not hiring, but it really it lays at the feet of Congress for not adequately funding the FAA to get them training. And then also, when we have these government shutdowns, the training process for air traffic controllers stops because they're not considered essential. They are considered essential once they complete training, but all of this, it contributes to a system-wide understaffing of air traffic controllers. And so the ladies and gentlemen that are active air traffic controllers, they're working a lot of overtime. They're being pushed. Now, that said, they do a remarkable job. They're very high quality people. They're very high quality professionals, and they move a lot of airplanes safely. That said, we have seen an uptick in the number of incidents, and some very serious ones, that have occurred. And so there is a focus on what the commonalities are between those incidents. So we definitely need to hire more air traffic controllers. FAA has made that a priority. The new administrator has already addressed that needs to happen, but we're still months or years away from attaining full employment status for all the controllers that we need this contributes, but I don't think it's a single cause.
I love this aviation stuff. I grew up in the shadow of an airport. I even toyed with the idea of being a pilot when I was a kid, and then somebody told me you had to be good at math, and that pretty much shot it for me. But um, oh, so I wanted to just delineate for us the different areas of responsibility. And I think about the radio a lot. Who do you talk to when you're in the air? Who do you talk to when you're on approach? Who do you talk to when you're landing? Who do you talk to when you're taxiing? Those are all different responsibilities, right?
They are. The National Airspace System is divided into a lot of different areas. And so when you're on the ground, you're talking to ground control, and all they do is provide clearances for people that are taxiing either after landing or before takeoff. The local controller handles the area. They're the control tower, and they handle the area in the immediate proximity, and that's where you get your takeoff clearances and your landing clearances. If you're on takeoff, once you're out of the local area and climbing, you're switched over to departure control. They control you up to 10, 12,000 feet typically, and then they move you to an en route traffic control center. And the centers they're subdivided as well, but they control all the en route traffic and high altitude traffic. So there's where you get your clearances up to your intermediate or final cruise altitudes. They're who you talk to throughout the cruise portion of the flight. As you begin to let down, the centers will continue to give you the descent clearances down to the 10, 12,000 foot range. And then they hand you off to approach control, which is a terminal radar approach control at a local airport. Those people line you up with the runway and sequence you for the runway. Then you're swapped over to the tower for your landing. And once you clear the runway, then you're back on ground control.
And as satellites and radio technology develops, would you like to have fewer handoffs, fewer areas of responsibilities, or this is just not an issue from a safety standpoint at all?
We are going to a more data link system. It's a controller pilot data link system. And so now you're getting more, they're similar to text messages. And that's where clearances come up. And it helps reduce the ambiguity that particularly the older radios had. If you're talking oceanic, up until, I guess, 20 years ago, we were still using 1930s technology of HF radios. And HF radios, they're like an AM radio. They're not real high quality. And, you're talking to folks hundreds or thousands of miles away. There was a lot of confusion. So you had to be very careful about phraseology and readbacks. In today's world with SATCOM and this controller pilot data link system, that ambiguity is gone. You get clearances to cross a given waypoint at a given altitude, and you acknowledge that, and it's precise, it's clear. There's no question about what the controllers want you to do with the airplane, and there's no question in the mind of the controller that you have understood the clearance and that you're going to comply with it.
Okay, great. Here's another question now. Sharif has another one. It says, modern aircrafts today have a traffic collision avoidance system, TCAS. Could TCAS, I think you've talked about this before, could that have helped in this recent accident, or its functionally operates only while both flights are airborne?
Yeah. And that's one of the questions that they will look at is the Japanese Coast Guard airplane did not have the most modern satellite technology known as ADS-B, which transmits information via satellite. Would that have made any difference? The investigators will look at that. TCAS itself, to prevent false alarms, it becomes inactive as you approach the ground, and it varies on airplanes about that altitude, but it's a couple of hundred feet. So below that altitude, the TCAS system would not give you a warning. If both airplanes are airborne, it would have, but to prevent nuisance and false alarms, the TCAS system does go inactive once you get below a given altitude.
Now that makes sense. I guess everything on the ground or the ground itself might make the TCAS
Exactly.
go off. So
Exactly.
here's another question from Suzanne. She says, could there be any factors in military versus civilian aircraft or procedures that would contribute to this event?
Investigators will certainly look at the compliance with the standard operating procedures of both crews, both airplanes. But civilian and military airplanes share airspace all the time, very common. So I wouldn't say on the outset that we're likely to have a problem there. The question, I think, is going to be more, what did the Coast Guard airplane understand its clearance to be? And what was that clearance? And I think that is going to be the central focus. And then on the periphery, then they'll look at standard operating procedures, equipment, the visibility of the JAL crew, all of those things I think they will look at. But I think the core questions are, what clearance did the Coast Guard airplane have? Did they comply with it? Was there ambiguity? What did the crew understand the clearance to be? Those sorts of questions.
Let me continue with this article here. Cabin crew were praised after managing to evacuate all 300 people aboard the plane, as the captain mentioned. On 2018, Britain's Royal Aeronautical Society recommended the automatic locking of overhead bins following a crash, noting that passengers often ignore safety briefings. Okay, I brought that up on screen because I thought that was a great idea. I mean, once you are on the ground, if something kicks in, you can't open those bins. Did they ever do that?
No,
Oh,
they have not. There's some issues with it. The cost of the locks, who's going to have the keys, how are they going to get them, how's that going to impact the boarding and deboarding of airplanes. There's a lot. It's not as simple as it sounds. The Royal Aeronautical Society, and I've been a member there for over 20 years as a fellow, they, in an ideal world, this would help. And one of the things, there was a British Airways Boeing 777 evacuation in Las Vegas, and I think it was about 2015. And one of the videos caught people routinely stopping to get their briefcases, to get their computers, or to get stuff out. This also was a factor in a couple of other evacuations. So there's been a lot of focus on what can we as an industry do to curtail people from spending time putting themselves and others at risk of getting things out of the airplane. So in the Japanese case, the A350, people didn't do that. You see the videos and the bins stay closed. And I commend those passengers for doing that. That is part of the reason they had such a good success with this evacuation, because less than half of the exits were available. The flight attendants properly opened 3 of the 8. So they had to get 379 people out of 3 exits, and they did it in 2 minutes. One of the things was, because people didn't stop and try to get their belongings, locking the bins, I'm not sure would have, could it have unintended consequences of people trying to break the locks to get their gear? So I'm not sure that in and of itself is an answer.
okay. To finish up this article now, it says the fire may be seen as a test case for airplane fuselages made from carbon composite fibers, such as the A350, instead of conventional aluminum skins. Quote, talking to the captain here, he says, we don't know that much about how they burn composites, said Captain Cox. This is the most catastrophic composite airplane fire that I can think of. And I've got composite hockey sticks, so I'm somewhat familiar with that stuff. I'm kind of surprised that they don't know much about how it burns. I would think it doesn't burn very readily or hardly at all, Captain. Is that correct?
What we haven't seen is, there has been some fire testing done in the certification, but when you see a fire of the intensity and the duration that we saw with the JAL A350, that's very hard to simulate in testing. So one of the things that is going to be looked at by the survival factors investigators is how did the airplane, the fuselage, protect people on the inside? Was it better or worse than aluminum alloy? Aluminum alloys start to break down at a couple of thousand degrees, 1,500, 2,000 degrees. This fire rapidly got to that because it's a jet fuel based fire. So would the conventional aluminum fuselages, would they have burned through earlier or not? So these are the kinds of questions. Right now, it looks like that this composite fuselage protected the people pretty well. Certainly there was smoke into the environment, into the cabin, but not to an excessive amount. So I think that's going to be a question that they'll look at.
Well, whenever I look at something like that, look at that, the thing of it is, again, if your plane has to emergency land for any reason, hell, you don't even need to know the reason. Be aware that a fire, a small fire, smoke, if it's present, it can really take off and go on these planes, and you do not have time to screw with your belongings or whatever. Be looking for these exits and a way to get off here. Now, I wanted to ask you about the exits. 3 of 8 were open, but was that because they didn't have enough time to open the others, or were they non-functional, or did they know that, or
they didn't open several of them because of fire.
I see.
That's a judgment call on the part of the flight attendants, and a very good call. You don't want to put people out into a fire. If you look, the right-hand engine, the number 2 engine, it appears that it's still running. It didn't shut down. So the first exit on the right-hand side, great. People are far enough in front of the engine, it doesn't matter. But the second one would put people out right in front of a running engine. You don't want to do that. If there's fire there, you don't want to open that door. Now, on a wide-body airplane like an A350, the doors are wider, they're bigger, so you can get 2 people off and on that slide at a time, which speeds up the evacuation process. And that's what I meant when I said earlier, the design of the doors, the training of the crew, and the execution of the crew and the passengers led to a great success here. But it's all 3 of those coming together.
Okay, we're talking with Captain John Cox, one of the world's foremost aviation safety experts, about this tragedy in Japan, claiming 4 lives, 5 lives, and 300 plus surviving because of some quick action and really the due diligence of people to get the hell off of the plane, which they did very quickly. I want to talk about some other things here. One of them is the good news when it comes to aviation safety. I got some questions for the captain on that. Then also we're going to talk very briefly before we leave today about nuts on planes. And again, we ain't talking about peanuts, but anything else on the JAL situation, Captain, before we move off of that?
I think before we make any conclusions, let's be patient, let the investigators do their job. And then once we do have the lessons learned, let's look at certification, let's look at training, let's look at safety briefings, and make sure that should we have another case where we need to evacuate an airplane, that it's equally successful.
Yeah. All right, great. So here it is. Here's the good news. Air safety 2023, the year that just passed. Happy New Year, folks. It is 2024. I have a tough time remembering these years. Accidents and fatalities are at a record low. And I thought that was really interesting because, man, we're back at it. I mean, these airports and planes are full everywhere. But 2023, commercial aviation was safer than in any previous year. According to a leading air safety expert, last year set a new record for the fewest accidents and deaths. Only 2 fatal accidents occurred during the 12 months compared with 6 in 2022. And again, now here's this highlighting is mine. This is the stat thing. In both crashes, propeller aircraft came down on domestic flights. And I'm thinking about that Nepal situation with a total of 86 deaths, fewer than half the 178 fatalities in 2023. For comparison, 148 people die in the average hour on the world's roads, according to the latest UN figures. And you think, well, there's a lot of people on the roads. Well, there's a lot of people in the air, too. We're talking about millions of people on planes, thousands and thousands of flights, Captain. So this is just absolutely stellar safety, right?
We did about 35 million flights last year, commercial
Wow.
flights. And of that, we had 2 accidents, none in commercial jets. So it is, if you look at it from the number of accidents, that it's the best in history. In fatalities, it had a little bit higher than we've had in 2017, but it was a remarkably good year. We are approaching what we did in 2019, which was record, and we're having extremely good success. And the system's working, the system is safe, and there's not a single cause for it. This is because of the effort of a huge number of people over decades that have improved certification standards, have improved airplane design, have improved pilot training, cabin flight attendant training, air traffic control procedures. It's the combination of all of it. It's the combination of a better reporting system for pilots, maintenance staff, dispatchers, flight attendants to report safety issues, and then for the operators to take action on those reported issues before they become incidents or accidents. We spend more time looking at incidents now as precursors to accidents. Put all of that together, there's the improvement in the safety management systems, how we manage risk. All of these pieces come together to give us a year like 2023.
Well, that's great. Let me ask you this. Now, we're talking about airliners and commercial, paid people in the air. How about general aviation? Do you monitor that? These smaller planes in general, their safety record, is it as good?
It's not as good as the commercial airliners, and there's a lot of reasons for it. A number of these, a high percentage, are single-engine, privately owned airplanes that are flown by recreational pilots, and that's my background. That's where I came from. So it can be done very safely, but an engine problem in a single-engine airplane is significantly more than it is on a multi-engine airplane that is a jet with professionally flown pilots. So this is where you kind of have to look and see what's causing the general aviation accidents. That said, in the 4 years that I've been a pilot, general aviation safety has improved dramatically. So we're seeing the entire industry improving in safety year over year, decade over decade. The airlines are setting the pace for it, and that's sort of the goal that the industry always holds itself to, is the scheduled commercial airlines, because it's the safest form of transportation ever designed by humankind.
I remember you talking on an earlier show about this 1,500-hour minimum thing for people to qualify for flying an airliner, and the kind of push or rush with GA pilots to get those hours in. Is that a safety issue?
There's a lot of debate on that. The U.S., following the Colgan accident in 2009, implemented a 1,500-hour rule. And it says that you must have 1,500 hours of flying time to be eligible to participate in an air carrier or commercial airline operation. They didn't delineate exactly what type of training that is. And there were some exceptions and reductions for military pilots and pilots that had come out of a highly structured training environment, such as a university. But for the most part, it's 1,500 hours. What we've learned, if you look at worldwide training, is if a pilot enters a structured system that they can safely fly airliners with less time, but it is because of the high structured and rigid nature of the training that they have to demonstrate competency in. So it becomes a quality of training versus quantity of flight time. And there's a lot of differences of opinion in the U.S., but what we've seen in Europe, what we've seen in Asia, what we've seen in a number of places is that somebody with virtually no flying experience can come into a program that says at the end of 500, 600 hours, you'll be qualified to fly as a first officer on an airliner. They've done it for decades, and they've done it safely. So I think there's substance on both sides of the argument.
I mentioned that I put the comments on screen, and I'll pose the questions, and I'll pose them here. Here's what I love, Desert Man. Is any comment on that guy who intentionally crashed his craft for a YouTube video? Yeah, I heard about that. I read that he gets it to fly again. What is the FAA thinking? I don't know if that's true or not. You know anything about that?
Yeah, they emergency revoked his pilot's license. So it's gone. Now, that is not to say that if he wanted to go back out and demonstrate competency that he might not requalify. But having done something as egregious as deliberately crash an airplane for a YouTube video, really? I think that they're going to look at him pretty carefully before they would consider recertifying him. But the revocation of his pilot's license, that's permanent. Can he requalify? It may very well depend, and I think the legal staff at the FAA would look at him pretty carefully.
Well, and that is an excellent segue there by Desert Menace to take us to the nuts on planes thing. That's a nut behind the yoke on a plane. Yeah. I don't know if I got for a YouTube video. Also, check out on YouTube about the Tennessee Fly Girl. That's very interesting. Also, again, this fascination with social media and taking priority over common sense and safety in aviation is amazing. And I don't know. I do a lot of politics, Captain. I think for me, my perspective of Americans and humanity was forever changed by January 6th when I saw that happening. Like, my God, who in the hell are we? And I also think that every time I see one of these crazy people on airplanes. But I've got some good news here. This is the unruly passenger report. Yeah, there is such a thing. Unruly passenger report. And this is through the years, 2021, for people watching in video. That's the top of the chart here. 5,973 unruly passenger reports in 2021. But this is a very good trend line, Captain.
It is. A lot of the 2021 problems was the requirement to wear masks on airplanes. And people tried to circumvent that. Oh, I have a medical excuse, or, oh, I don't want to do that, or, oh, you can't force me to do that. There was, a significant percentage of that spike in 2021 were due to masks. And the thing is, the flight crews had no voice in that. They were only following the rules that had come down from the FAA. So the unruly passengers, I have zero tolerance for that. And an unruly passenger on aircraft that I was responsible for would get you ejected and off the airplane very quickly. And it's a decision that I never enjoyed making, but it was hard, fast. If you threaten my crew, if you don't comply with us, you're a safety risk when we're in flight. You're not going on the airplane. And let me be real clear, the captain has that authority. And so I'm glad to see the trend line coming down. It's still much, much, much higher. And you see the videos of people who say, I'm just not going to do that. Oh, yeah, you are. Because one, the airplane's not leaving until you're not on it. And law enforcement is wonderful. They have constraints that they have to work with. But if a captain says you're not going on the airplane, law enforcement will, up to the point of arresting you and taking you off the airplane, they will do that. And so you may not agree with what the cabin crew, the flight attendants are telling you, but you can't just arbitrarily say, I'm not complying with it. I won't wear a seatbelt, or I won't. I'm going to sit here and kick the seat in front of me. You can't do that. And so I have no tolerance for unruly behavior. It is not just a U.S. problem. It is a problem worldwide, but we do seem to have a higher incident rate than a lot of countries. And I think it's a sad commentary on our society.
Yeah, I do too. These nuts on planes, as I phrase it. A lot of people say that's not a good thing to say, but it is an issue. My deal is I'm just like the captain says, I'm on a plane. Be cool, dude. I mean, let's have everything go according to script. I don't want anything crazy happening. Now, the FAA has put together a video on this. This is really good. It's only 30 seconds long. Watch this.
We got a disruptive customer in the back. Declare an emergency. We'd like to divert. As there's no struggles going on. He is restrained now. The unruly passenger, we need to get off the airplane. Do you need authorities on the ground? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
When the flight attendants call up front and say, hey, we've got a problem back here. Okay, one of the two pilots is going to have to spend a good amount of time trying to deal with that, both in coordination with them, what decisions are going to be made. If there's a divert, now you have dramatically increased the workload on that crew, because all the programming of the flight management system has got to be redone. The rebriefings of what landing you're going to do. Are you going to declare an emergency? Who do you want to meet the airplane? Do you want law enforcement to meet the airplane? Are you going to a gate? Is there a gate available? There's just a myriad of questions that have to get solved. It's much better if your pilots are concentrating on going to the original destination and not having to deal with this.
Yeah, exactly. They got their hands full. If you don't think so, if you don't think it isn't meaningful, just think of Japan. Just think of the situation that just happened. My God, you don't need any distractions. Now, here's something people may not be aware of. I wanted to bring this up on screen. Now, these people, these nuts on planes, they're not thinking. So this is more for people that think. But failing to follow crew instructions or engaging in disruptive or violent behavior on a plane can affect you in more ways than one. And one is jail time. Unruly passenger incidents are referred to the FBI when warranted, and you can earn a felony conviction out of this, folks. Then there are the fines. The FAA can propose up to $37,000 per violation for unruly passenger cases. One incident can result in multiple fines, so multiples of that amount of money. And then travel restrictions. You can get yourself banned from an airline. Now, I don't think you can be banned from the air, but an airline does not have to do business with you again if you do something like this, Captain.
That's correct. That's correct. And I would encourage airlines to share their no-fly list, because if somebody is disruptive on one airline, there's nothing to say they won't be disruptive on another one. One thing that is, if there's violence involved, this escalates really quickly. So if any violent behavior results in immediately, in all likelihood, you'll be arrested for assault. If it's a flight crew member, then that's a federal crime and it can be a felony. So, and it's taken really seriously. The flight crews really don't have a lot of tolerance about it. So and nor should they. I mean, I agree. I don't have any tolerance for it personally. So, but any action that is considered or deemed violent, this escalates it to a much higher level. It does go to the FBI. It can certainly result and has resulted in people being incarcerated. But when you do that, the airlines, once you're banned, you're done. You're not going to fly with that airline again. And that has significant impact. Also, getting like TSA pre-check, all of that goes away. So there's a lot involved here, and people that act in an unruly fashion, it's as if they don't think about this.
Yeah.
They may not fly often enough, but everybody else in the airplane's not causing a problem, and you're going to write your own rules. Not going to happen, because we will not compromise the safety of everybody on board by one or two passengers thinking that they can do anything they want to.
Yeah, and the trend line is good. I've got that graphic up on screen for people to take a look at here as to how it's trending, but it's still, I guess, in your opinion, you'd say way too high and a lot different than it used to be in yesteryear. I look at this and I think, well, and I've heard you talk about it before, alcohol on planes plays a role in this, but they had alcohol on planes when you were flying, and we didn't have this kind of incidences. But I mean, should these be dry flights? I mean, should we take booze off the planes?
I'm hard pressed to say that would cure the problem. I mean, we see a good number of these incidents on the ground pre-boarding, and people have not necessarily had any alcohol. There was a ban on the alcohol sales during the pandemic, and yet the statistics of unruly passengers spiked. So I would say that as we're handling it now, which if the flight crew determines that somebody has had enough or more than enough alcohol and refuses to serve them, that's exactly how it should be handled. Flight crews just need to be aware. But there is this is a major revenue source for the airlines. I understand that, and so I think that having a glass of wine with a meal, that makes perfect sense to me. So, but it's people that are that can't handle it or have too much, then I think that they're not allowed on the airplanes. One note for you, George.
Yeah.
The way that the rules are written is you don't have to be intoxicated to be denied boarding on an airliner. The way the rule reads is that you appear to be intoxicated or impaired. And at that point, it's the judgment specifically of the captain. But you can argue, oh, I didn't have that much. If you solely appear to have had too much, the captain has the right and the responsibility to refuse travel.
Yeah, and we're not going to get into a societal conversation. It's all, it goes back to, I used to drink back in the day, but I don't know. It used to be when I was a young person drinking, you tried to be adult. You tried to play it off. You tried to act like you weren't under the influence. That's kind of what we used to do back in the day. Today, it's kind of like I have a couple of beers and act like a wild man and cause these situations on the plane. I don't know how to resolve it exactly. I remember when I used to fly back in the day, Captain, the first thing the stewardess said coming down the aisle was, anybody want an eye opener? I mean, if you were on a red eye, early morning flight, 7 a.m., an eye opener, yeah, they'd give you a bottle of booze, but they didn't have people trying to crawl out the doors and windows of the airplane either. So, I mean, the world has changed.
The world has definitely changed, George. No question of that.
Desert Manna says, excellent live stream, Captain Cox. Yeah, happy New Year. And Suzanne, I want to give her last word. Too many passengers fly and drink responsibly and should have to pay for the behavior of others. Yeah, I don't drink, but it seems like an individual case-by-case situation. Yeah, so much of that is. All right, and that's kind of a good topic for the new year. I mean, just after New Year's Eve here we go, Captain. Another flight around the sun with Captain Cox at the controls. I want to give you a last word here as we wrap up. We close this edition of Podcast by George.
I think the big news today was the JAL collision and the unfortunate death of some Japanese Coast Guard folks. There's lessons learned. There's lessons learned to listen to the flight attendants in their safety briefing. Understand clearly where the nearest exit is. And if you're told to evacuate the airplane, leave your belongings behind. That, and then keep your seatbelt fastened when you're not headed to the lavatory. That's the two most important things you as a passenger can do to help the continued improvement of aviation safety. If we can do that, George, we can continue to see aviation improve in safety, and that's the goal for all of us.
That's great. That's well said. Captain Cox, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Folks, we'll get him back here again soon, and we'll send him on his way. And if you like seeing Captain Cox on Podcast by George. As I say at the end of every show, go to podcastbygeorge.com and subscribe. Sign up on Facebook and YouTube. Easily done there. Just select those badges for those destinations. And then also for the audio only versions, you want to listen to these while you're out and about traveling, driving your car, riding your bike, running a marathon, let's say. You can get them on Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, iTunes, all those places where audio podcasts are heard. But that's going to do it, folks. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.